In the heart of a dazzling ballroom filled with wealth, elegance, and champagne laughter, Layla Dean stood at the edge of the spotlight, an invisible guest in a borrowed vintage gown. A seamstress by night and a bookstore cashier by day, she had no place among the city's elite. She was only there to do a favor for her best friend, filling in at a charity gala hosted at the towering Crestmore Hotel. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. As she bent down to pick up a fallen name tag, the impossible happened. The back of her carefully mended dress gave way with a loud, dreadful rip. Gasps echoed around her as eyes turned. Laughter sparkled like broken glass in the air, and shame surged up her spine. Then warmth. A tailored black tuxedo jacket slid over her shoulders from behind. A man's voice whispered, "Let them look, but let them see strength, not fear." She turned, startled, meeting the calm gaze of a man who radiated quiet power. She didn't know who he was, but he had just covered her shame and unknowingly opened the first page of a story that would change her life. The invitation had been printed on thick ivory cardstock, with gold embossed lettering and a wax seal stamped with the Crestmore Foundation's signature crest, a lion wrapped around a book. Layla had never seen such an invitation in person before, let alone received one addressed to her name. Except it hadn't been addressed to her. It was meant for her best friend, Amira Patel, a rising PR manager whose boss had sent her to cover the charity gala for the Literacy and Youth Initiative hosted at New York's opulent Crestmore Hotel. But the day before the event, Amira fell sick with the flu. "You have to go in my place." She begged Layla over a croaky phone call. "Just smile, hand out press kits, and look professional. That's it. Please, my job depends on this." Layla hesitated. The most glamorous place she'd been in the past year was the discount rack at the second-hand bookstore where she worked. Her idea of fancy was ironing her one black dress and borrowing lipstick from Amira on birthdays. But this was Crestmore, a hotel where celebrities attended galas, where billionaires made headlines, where women wore designer gowns, not patched-up vintage dresses from thrift stores. Still, Amira had been there for her through breakups, rent crises, and emotional breakdowns over bobbin threads. How could she say no now? "Fine," Layla sighed, "but I swear, if I get thrown out by a bodyguard, I'm haunting you." By the time Layla arrived at the Crestmore Grand Ballroom, she was already second, guessing everything, from the 1950s teal-length dress she had altered herself to the cheap heels pinching her toes. She clutched Amira's press pass and the stack of press kits like a lifeline. The ballroom was a sea of elegance, chandeliers dripping crystal light, jazz music humming in the background, servers gliding with silver trays. The women sparkled in designer couture, tall and poised, while the men sipped scotch in fitted tuxedos, discussing market trends and private islands. Layla felt like a coffee stain on silk. She found a corner near the entrance, doing her best to smile and hand out the kits while staying invisible. No one paid her much attention, until she bent down to pick up a name badge someone had dropped. Rip, it was loud, it was final. The back seam of her carefully mended dress split in two like a paper bag. For a moment, the ballroom fell into silence, followed by scattered gasps and a stifled chuckle from a woman nearby. Layla's hands flew to the back of her dress. Her eyes darted around, searching for a miracle. Panic clawed its way up her throat like fire. She wanted to vanish, to disappear under the marble floor, and then, like magic, a jacket slid over her shoulders. It was soft, expensive, and warm. A male voice whispered behind her ear, calm and steady, "Let them look, but let them see strength, not shame." Layla turned. He was tall, broad-shouldered, black tuxedo, no tie. Salt-tanned, pepper hair, the kind of man whose presence demanded attention not by noise, but by silence. His eyes were kind, intelligent, striking. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Come," he said gently, guiding her by the elbow toward a side hallway. She followed, her heart thudding against her ribs. Once away from the crowd, Layla let out the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping the lapels of his jacket tighter around herself. I was about to run, I know," he replied, leaning casually against the marble wall beside her. "But you didn't. That says something." Layla blushed. "I'm not even supposed to be here." He tilted his head. "Is that supposed to surprise me? I'm not rich or glamorous or important." "You don't need to be," he said simply. There was an awkward pause before he offered his hand. "I'm Julian Ward." Layla hesitated, then shook his hand. "Layla Dean, I work in a bookstore." "Then you're more important than most people in that ballroom." She snorted a laugh before she could stop herself. "Right." He didn't laugh. He said it with sincerity. "You feed minds, that's a rare thing these days." Layla looked at him closely. He didn't have the slick, performative charm she'd come to associate with men at events like this. He was different, grounded. But there was something else too. The way people had glanced at him as they passed. The way the event manager had subtly nodded in his direction. "Do you work here?" she asked. Julian smiled, a twinkle in his eye. "In a way." Before she could ask more, a tall woman in a red gown appeared at the end of the hall. "Julian," she called sharply, "they're starting the keynote. You're needed at the podium." Layla froze. The podium, that meant? Julian turned to her, apologetic. "Duty calls. Will you be okay?" She nodded mutely. He stepped away, then turned back. "Keep the jacket and hold your head high." Then he was gone. Layla stood there, stunned. She had just been rescued, literally wrapped in comfort, by the man giving the keynote speech at a $1 billion foundation gala. Back at home later that night, Layla folded the jacket carefully and tucked it into a garment bag, attaching a note that read, "Thank you for seeing me when I wanted to disappear. Layla." She dropped it at the hotel's front desk the next day, certain she'd never see him again. But life, as it turned out, had other plans. 2 days had passed since the gala, but the moment replayed endlessly in Layla's mind, the sound of the rip, the hush of the room, the heat on her cheeks. And then his voice, his jacket, his calm. She barely remembered the drive home. She had clutched that jacket like armor the whole way, embarrassed but also changed. She didn't know who Julian Ward really was. Google had revealed little. There were far too many Julian Ward results, and the one photo she thought might be him was blurry at best. He was clearly important, yet not loud about it. That made him more mysterious. By the time Layla returned to her bookstore shift on Monday, her world had shrunk back into dusty shelves and late inventory checks. She was shelving used copies of historical fiction when her manager, Renee, called from the front desk. "Layla, something just arrived for you." "For me?" She furrowed her brow and headed to the front. On the counter sat a box, cream, colored with a navy ribbon, no return address on top, an envelope, her name. Handwritten, her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. "For the woman who stitches others back together, I'd love to meet again, over coffee. No jackets needed this time. Julian." She blinked, then again. Inside the box was a folded piece of rich emerald green fabric. Silk, soft as water. Layla gasped. She knew material quality by touch. And this was no ordinary textile. It was rare, expensive. It glowed with depth. The note wasn't signed with a number or a way to contact him. Just a small silver, embossed business card in the bottom of the box. Julian Ward, Crestmore Investments. That evening, Layla sat in front of her tiny sewing table, the emerald silk spread across her lap. She hadn't dared cut into it yet. Her hands hovered, still unsure whether this was real. Amira was curled up on the couch behind her, finally recovering from the flu. "So, the guy from the gala sent you fabric?" Layla nodded. "And a note asking for coffee." "Girl," Amira groaned dramatically, "he gave you a jacket, now silk. What next? A penthouse? Stop it." "I'm just saying, you need to go. You have to meet him." "I don't even know what I'd say. I'm not a coffee with billionaires type." Maybe he's not the date models and own yachts type either. Layla hesitated. Amira added, and besides, maybe the universe just decided it's your turn. She emailed the contact on the card, expecting silence or a polite assistant to write back. Instead, she received a reply an hour later. From Julian Ward, subject, Coffee Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. No suits, no speeches, just conversation. I'll pick a quiet place. Let me know if that works. Jay, it worked. And yet, Layla stood in front of her mirror Wednesday evening, panicking about her outfit. After trying on 5 different looks, she settled on what she called her soft armor, a denim jacket, a navy blue dress she had sewn herself, and boots that made her feel grounded. She walked into the cafe 5 minutes early, and found him already there. No tuxedo, no polished speech, just Julian in a charcoal sweater, sleeves rolled up, his smile warm and genuine. "You came," he said, rising to pull out her chair. "You asked," she replied, nervous. They ordered coffee, no fancy brews or imported blends, just classic dark roast. "I'm glad you reached out," she said once they were settled. "I wasn't sure if, I don't know, if I was supposed to return your jacket and disappear." He smiled. "I wouldn't have let that happen." They talked, first awkwardly, then with surprising ease. He told her about his foundation work, how he'd inherited Crestmore from his father but had shifted focus to causes that mattered, literacy programs, art education, after-school mentorship. He confessed that he didn't usually speak to strangers at galas, but when he saw her standing frozen, he just knew he had to act. "Not just because I felt bad," he said quietly, "because you didn't belong there, but in the best way. You weren't posturing, you were real, and I miss that in my world." Layla, touched, smiled shyly. "You say that like your world is fake." "Sometimes," he admitted, "lots of masks, lots of people acting wealthy even when they don't need to, but your dress was vintage, repaired by hand, and when it ripped, you didn't scream or storm out. You endured. Because disappearing wasn't an option." "Exactly," he said, sipping his coffee. "That's grace under fire." By the time the cafe closed, Layla didn't want to leave. Outside, under soft streetlight, Julian turned to her. "I know we're from different worlds, I get that, but I'd like to see you again if you're willing." Layla hesitated, then she smiled. "Yes, I think I'd like that." He nodded. "Then I'll walk you to the train." As they strolled down the quiet street, something felt new. Not just romantic tension, but a shift, like the air had changed. Like maybe, for once, Layla wasn't just on the sidelines of life. Maybe she was stepping into her story, one stitch at a time. The second time Julian Ward showed up in Layla's world, he wasn't wearing a suit or driving a luxury car. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor of her bookstore during Saturday morning's children's story hour, a tiny copy of The Velveteen Rabbit in his lap and a 5-year-old girl braiding his hair. Layla nearly dropped her coffee. He winked at her from the reading rug while the children giggled and tugged at his salt and pepper curls. After the session, she confronted him by the poetry shelf. "What are you doing here? You said you work Saturdays," he said innocently. "I wanted to see you again. Thought I'd blend in with the story crowd. You let a toddler braid your hair. She said I looked too bossy. I figured I'd take the note." Layla laughed despite herself. Julian became a quiet presence in her life, not overwhelming, not showy, just present. He'd bring her lunch at the bookstore on Wednesdays, help her carry her thrifted fabric bags up 3 flights of stairs to her walk-up apartment, and occasionally leave notes scribbled on bookmarks in the books he borrowed. She learned that he loved early morning walks through Central Park, old jazz records, and lemon tea, that he had lost his mother young and was raised by a father too busy to show up for parent-teacher meetings. She, in return, told him about her childhood, how her mother had taught her to sew, how her dad had walked out before she turned 10, and how her grandma's old sewing machine had become her sanctuary when emotions threatened to overflow. "Sewing makes things make sense," she told him one evening, "stitch by stitch, piece by piece. You don't need money to feel proud of something you made. Julian listened, always listened, and then, after a month of gentle momentum, he asked her to come to one of his events. It's not a gala, he said quickly, seeing the apprehension in her eyes. It's a fundraiser for a local youth center, just dinner and conversation. Layla hesitated, her stomach tightened. I'm not sure I'm ready for that side of your life. I understand, he said. But I want you to see what matters to me. After a long pause, she nodded. Okay, but I'm wearing something I made. Even better, he grinned. Those are my favorites. Layla worked for 3 nights straight on her dress. She chose a soft burgundy fabric and paired it with black lace from a second-hand bridal shop's clearance bin. The cut was classic, high neckline, nipped waist, A-line skirt, clean, confident, hers. On the night of the fundraiser, Julian arrived at her apartment exactly on time. She opened the door and watched his reaction. His breath hitched. You look incredible. You always say that, because it's always true, he said, offering his arm. The event was held in a cozy historic hall in the East Village. Nothing like the gala, no chandeliers or champagne towers, just community leaders, artists, youth mentors, and real stories. Julian introduced her to everyone proudly. This is Layla. She's a seamstress, a book lover, and the reason I look forward to Wednesdays. Layla felt nervous, but welcomed. She spoke to an elderly woman who ran a poetry club for teens, shared sewing tips with a retired costume designer, and helped serve food alongside the volunteers. For once, she didn't feel like a stranger in a room full of powerful people. She felt like someone who mattered. As the night drew to a close, Layla and Julian sat on the steps outside, watching the city lights flicker. Thank you, she said. For what? For inviting me into something you care about. Julian looked at her, eyes soft. It means more with you in it. They kissed for the first time that night. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was slow and tentative, like 2 people finally letting go of breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Layla's fingers curled into his lapel, while his hand cupped her cheek gently, reverently. In that moment, she felt safe. But happiness has a way of waking the sleeping wolves. 2 weeks later, Layla was walking home from the store when her phone buzzed. A message from Amira, just one line, "Girl, you're in the tabloids." Layla froze, heart racing. She clicked the link. There she was, a photo from the fundraiser, her laughing beside Julian, his hand at the small of her back. The headline read, "Mystery woman spotted again with Julian Ward. Is the billionaire off the market?" Her stomach dropped. The article speculated about who she was, describing her dress as homemade, and her appearance as charming in a modest way. There were comments. So many comments. Some were kind, others were brutal. Gold digger in vintage disguise. Can't believe he's slumming it with a bookstore girl. She must be a PR stunt. No way he's serious. Layla sat on her apartment steps, the screen blurring in her vision. That night she didn't return Julian's texts, didn't open the door when he knocked. She needed time. He waited. He didn't force a conversation, but he left a note under her door the next morning. "I can't stop the world from talking, but I can promise you this, they don't get to write our story. We do." "Jay," Layla cried reading it. Not because she doubted his words, but because she doubted herself. Could she survive in his world? Could someone built from second-hand dreams stand beside a man with penthouses and press coverage? She didn't know. But for the first time in her life, she didn't want to run. She wanted to sew the torn edges of her fear. She wanted to try. The whisper of fame doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door in. For a few days after the tabloid photo went viral, Layla stayed tucked inside her small Brooklyn apartment, windows closed, heart guarded. She kept her phone on silent. Messages from coworkers, friends, even distant cousins poured in with emojis, exclamation marks, and unsolicited opinions. And Julian, he waited. He didn't text nonstop, didn't press. Instead, he left space, space that echoed, By the fourth day, Layla was pacing like a storm trapped in a teacup. She hated the noise in her head, hated how she let strangers behind screen names decide how she felt about herself. She wasn't ashamed of loving books, or making her own dresses, or living in a studio where her sewing machine took up more space than her fridge. But what if Julian was? What if the noise outside was the part of his world she could never silence? That evening, a soft knock broke her thoughts. Not loud, not demanding, just a rhythm she had come to recognize. She opened the door. Julian stood there with a brown paper bag in one hand and tired eyes. "I brought that dumpling soup you like," he said, "and lemon tea." Layla stepped aside without a word. He entered quietly, setting the bag down on her tiny table. The room smelled like soy, ginger, and unspoken feelings. "Thanks," she said, her voice small. "I didn't want to force a conversation, but I've missed you." She didn't meet his eyes. I didn't know what to say. "Then say nothing. Just let me be here." And so they sat, on the floor, back against her couch, sipping soup in silence. Slowly, word by word, the truth spilled between them. I saw the comments. She admitted. Some were cruel. I know. "I don't want to be a burden. You're not." "I'm not made for the spotlight, Julian. I don't know how to smile for cameras or wear heels worth more than rent." He turned to her. "And I don't want you to." Layla looked at him then, finally. "Then what do you want?" His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I want a life that feels real. One with mismatched mugs, bookstore hours, and a woman who builds beauty out of thread. I want you, not because you're different from my world, but because you remind me there's a better one." Layla's throat tightened. "But how do we survive them? The ones who judge, who mock, who already think I'm some gold, digging nobody? We don't live for them," Julian replied. "We live despite them." The next weekend, Layla agreed to go out again, with Julian, publicly. It wasn't a red carpet or gala. It was a quiet brunch at a cafe in the Upper West Side, where the pancakes were fluffier than the chairs were fancy. But it didn't matter. People noticed. Whispers followed. Still, Layla held his hand tighter, and when one paparazzi snapped a photo from across the street, Julian turned, waved, and kissed her on the cheek without shame. That picture made headlines too. But the caption was different this time. Julian Ward's mystery muse, from bookstore girl to graceful girlfriend. Some of the comments were kinder now, others still cruel, but Layla didn't flinch. The true test came when Julian invited her to his penthouse apartment for the first time. Layla almost didn't go, but curiosity and courage won. His home was everything she imagined. Polished wood floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, tasteful art, and a grand piano in the corner he admitted he never played. But what surprised her most were the books, stacks of them, not arranged by color or aesthetic, but geared and loved, business manuals, novels, children's books, a shelf dedicated entirely to poetry. "I used to read to my little sister," Julian said quietly as she walked through the hallway. "She had a learning disability, took her years to enjoy reading, but when she did, she never stopped." Layla paused in front of a photo, a smiling teenage girl with braces and wild hair holding a book titled Bridge to Terabithia. "She passed away 5 years ago," Julian said. "She was 16. I'm sorry." "She's the reason I fund literacy programs. Her world opened when she could read. It changed her life, so I figured, maybe I can help change others too." Layla turned to him. "You never told me that." "Some stories take time to share." She stepped closer and took his hand. "Thank you for telling me." That night, they lay on his couch, her head on his chest, the city lights painting stripes across the ceiling. Julian stroked her hair. "You don't need to become part of my world, Layla." She looked up. "Then what do you want from me?" He smiled. "I want to build a new one, with both of ours stitched together." Her breath caught. He added, "But only if you want that too." Layla stared at the skyline, the patchwork quilt of buildings and neon below. She had spent so long believing she didn't belong in places like this. But maybe belonging wasn't about status. Maybe it was about who stood beside you when the seams of your life split open, and what you chose to sow with them after. The whisper of fame doesn't knock politely, it kicks the door in. For a few days after the tabloid photo went viral, Layla stayed tucked inside her small Brooklyn apartment, windows closed, heart guarded. She kept her phone on silent. Messages from coworkers, friends, even distant cousins poured in with emojis, exclamation marks, and unsolicited opinions. And Julian, he waited. He didn't text nonstop. Didn't press. Instead, he left space. Space that echoed. By the fourth day, Layla was pacing like a storm trapped in a teacup. She hated the noise in her head, hated how she let strangers behind screen names decide how she felt about herself. She wasn't ashamed of loving books, or making her own dresses, or living in a studio where her sewing machine took up more space than her fridge. But what if Julian was? What if the noise outside was the part of his world she could never silence? That evening, a soft knock broke her thoughts. Not loud, not demanding, just a rhythm she had come to recognize. She opened the door. Julian stood there with a brown paper bag in one hand and tired eyes. "I brought that dumpling soup you like," he said, "and lemon tea." Layla stepped aside without a word. He entered quietly, setting the bag down on her tiny table. The room smelled like soy, ginger, and unspoken feelings. "Thanks," she said, her voice small. "I didn't want to force a conversation, but I've missed you." She didn't meet his eyes. "I didn't know what to say." "Then say nothing. Just let me be here." And so they sat, on the floor, back against her couch, sipping soup and silence. Slowly, word by word, the truth spilled between them. "I saw the comments," she admitted. "Some were cruel. I know. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. I'm not made for the spotlight, Julian. I don't know how to smile for cameras or wear heels worth more than rent." He turned to her. "And I don't want you to." Layla looked at him then, finally. "Then what do you want?" His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I want a life that feels real. One with mismatched mugs, bookstore hours, and a woman who builds beauty out of thread. I want you, not because you're different from my world, but because you remind me there's a better one." Layla's throat tightened. "But how do we survive them, the ones who judge, who mock, who already think I'm some gold, digging nobody? We don't live for them," Julian replied. "We live despite them." The next weekend, Layla agreed to go out again, with Julian, publicly. It wasn't a red carpet or gala. It was a quiet brunch at a cafe in the Upper West Side where the pancakes were fluffier than the chairs were fancy. But it didn't matter. People noticed. Whispers followed. Still, Layla held his hand tighter, and when one paparazzi snapped a photo from across the street, Julian turned, waved, and kissed her on the cheek without shame. That picture made headlines too. But the caption was different this time. Julian Ward's mystery muse, from bookstore girl to graceful girlfriend. Some of the comments were kinder now, others still cruel, but Layla didn't flinch. The true test came when Julian invited her to his penthouse apartment for the first time. Layla almost didn't go, but curiosity and courage won. His home was everything she imagined, polished wood floor to ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, tasteful art, and a grand piano in the corner he admitted he never played. But what surprised her most were the stacks of them, not arranged by color or aesthetic, but geared and loved, business manuals, novels, children's books, a shelf dedicated entirely to poetry. "I used to read to my little sister," Julian said quietly as she walked through the hallway. She had a learning disability. Took her years to enjoy reading, but when she did, she never stopped. Layla paused in front of a photo, a smiling teenage girl with braces and wild hair holding a book titled Bridge to Terabithia. "She passed away 5 years ago," Julian said. "She was 16. I'm sorry. She's the reason I fund literacy programs. Her world opened when she could read. It changed her life, so I figured, maybe I can help change others too." Layla turned to him. "You never told me that. Some stories take time to share." She stepped closer and took his hand. "Thank you for telling me." That night they lay on his couch, her head on his chest, the city lights painting stripes across the ceiling. Julian stroked her hair. "You don't need to become part of my world, Layla." She looked up. "Then what do you want from me?" He smiled. "I want to build a new one, with both of ours stitched together." Her breath caught. He added, "But only if you want that too." Layla stared at the skyline, the patchwork quilt of buildings and neon below. She had spent so long believing she didn't belong in places like this. But maybe belonging wasn't about status. Maybe it was about who stood beside you when the seams of your life split open, and what you chose to sew with them after. The night after the gala was quiet, unusually so. Layla and Julian sat side by side in the back seat of his car, but neither spoke. The city glowed outside, blurred by windows kissed with condensation. Her hands lay in her lap, the folds of her emerald dress still perfect, but her heart fluttered with uncertainty. The standing ovation still echoed in her ears, but it wasn't applause that stayed with her. It was the silence between them now. When they arrived at Julian's penthouse, she followed him upstairs. The city lights poured through the glass like molten gold, but Layla didn't feel their warmth. Julian poured her tea lemon just how she liked it, and handed her the cup. Then he finally spoke. "You were magnificent tonight." She looked up at him. It didn't feel real. "It was real," he said gently, "and you did it without me holding your hand. That's what scares me." He raised a brow. "Scares you?" She took a deep breath. "What if I don't need you? What if I'm starting to become something else, someone else?" Julian set down his own cup and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Layla, love isn't about needing. It's about choosing. But if I'm finally choosing myself, what if that means letting you go?" He stared at her for a long moment, then softly said, "Then I'll let you." Silence swallowed the room. Julian stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "I don't want to own your strength. I only want to walk beside it." Layla swallowed hard. "I've loved you from the moment I saw you standing in that ballroom, trembling but refusing to crumble. But I won't fight for you if you're fighting against yourself." Tears welled in her eyes. "This world," she whispered, "your world, it's still not built for women like me." Julian turned to face her. "Then let's build our own." She left that night with her heart in her throat and the taste of lemon still on her tongue. Back in her apartment, Layla stared at the pieces of her life. The bookshelf, the spools of thread, the sewing machine humming faintly from a commission she'd left half finished. All the parts of herself she had carefully stitched together over years of heartbreak, survival, and quiet wins. She sat at her machine, let her hands move, let the thread guide her. By dawn, a new dress lay draped across the chair, not for an event, not for Julian, for herself. 2 days later, Julian found a box waiting outside his penthouse. Inside was the dress, soft lilac, clean lines, one of Layla's finest, and a note. "You once gave me a jacket when I had nothing to cover myself with. Now I return a dress, not out of debt, but choice. I choose you, I choose us, not because I'm broken, but because I'm whole. Layla." Julian read it 3 times, then he did something no one had seen him do in years. He cried. He didn't call her, he didn't text. He walked from Midtown to Brooklyn, over bridges, through early evening rush hour, past honking taxis and food trucks. He walked all the way to her neighborhood bookstore. When Layla saw him standing outside the window, holding her note, her heart stilled. He entered quietly. "I read your letter," he said, eyes misted. "And he stepped closer, and I came to return it." She looked at him confused. "Why?" "Because I'd rather keep you than any note." She blinked, laughed softly. "That's the worst romantic line I've ever heard." He grinned. "Good, because I'm done being perfect." She stepped into him, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't tentative, it was everything. That night they lay together in her apartment, no skyline views, no silk sheets, just the sound of sewing thread rolling across the floor, and the slow, steady breathing of 2 people who had chosen each other. Julian whispered, "I don't care where we live. I don't care about press or parties. I care about this." Layla smiled in the dark. So do I. They didn't make promises that night. They didn't need to. Some love stories aren't sewn in grand halls or written in gold ink. Some are stitched in silence, washed in tears, and pressed in the heat of fear. And still they hold. There's a strange kind of stillness that comes after a storm. No more paparazzi, no more online gossip, just mornings with oatmeal, mismatched socks, and soft jazz humming through Julian's speakers. 2 weeks after Layla gave Julian her letter, she moved into the penthouse. Not because he asked, because she wanted to, but she didn't pack everything. She brought her grandmother's sewing machine, her best books, and the antique yellow teacup she refused to drink from, but kept near her bed. Julian cleared space for it, all literally and figuratively. He gave her an entire room for sewing, painted it sage green, let her hang vintage thread racks and pin up design sketches. When she walked in for the first time, she gasped. "You made me a studio?" He shrugged, proud and nervous. "I figured. You need a space that's yours." Layla stood silent for a moment, overwhelmed. Then she wrapped her arms around him. "Thank you." They developed a rhythm. Mornings were quiet. Layla liked to wake early, drink coffee with oat milk, and sketch by the window. Julian joined her later, always in silence, always with his reading glasses and the Times under his arm. Some days they worked separately, Layla with her custom clients and fabric deliveries, Julian with his board meetings and foundation planning, but they always found each other by night. Dinner became a ritual. Not extravagant, simple meals Layla cooked or Julian ordered. They took turns choosing the background music, sometimes jazz, sometimes indie folk. Once, just for fun, Julian played 90s R&B and slowed, danced her around the kitchen. It wasn't glamorous, it was real, and for a while that was enough. But love in the ordinary brings its own kinds of friction. It began with a late meeting. Julian missed dinner, no text, no explanation. Layla waited, food cold, the night stretching thin. When he finally walked in, apologetic and exhausted, she didn't yell. She just said, "This matters to me." He sighed, "I know, I lost track of time. You didn't want to track it, Layla. I just want to be part of your real life," she said. "Not just your refuge from it." Julian sat down. "You are my real life." She stared at him. "Then show me." Later that week, Julian invited her to attend a private investor dinner. Not a fundraiser, not press. "Business," Layla hesitated. "I want you to see the part of my world I never wanted to share with anyone," he said. "Not because you need to fit into it, but because I want to make space for you in it." She went. Not in couture, but in a navy silk jumpsuit she made herself. And that night, as she watched Julian field questions about company mergers and market pivots, she saw a different man, confident, commanding. Complex, he wasn't just the man who held her in the dark or laughed at her morning bed hair. He was also this man, and to her surprise, she wasn't intimidated anymore. She was curious. Later, in the elevator, she told him, "I think I could love all of you." Julian kissed her shoulder. "Even the boring business parts, especially those, but change isn't easy." Layla had always made her world fit inside the seams of survival. Rent, routine, resilience. She had never shared it with someone who could afford to solve problems with a phone call. Once, during a weekend trip to the countryside, their car broke down. Julian instinctively pulled out his phone to call a private driver. Layla touched his hand. "Let's fix it ourselves." He blinked. "Why? Because I want to know we can, just us." So they did. Layla held the flashlight while Julian, sleeves rolled up, tried to jumpstart the battery. They got grease on their clothes, dirt on their shoes, and a laugh that echoed across the empty field. When the engine roared to life, Julian turned to her, grinning like a boy. "That," he said, "was the most fun I've had in weeks." Their love was no longer stitched in moments of rescue. It was stitched in messy breakfasts, shared books, stubborn disagreements, and long car rides. They argued over toothpaste caps and thermostat settings. They made up over burnt toast and apologies whispered in blankets. Layla began selling custom gowns online, orders rolled in. Julian offered to fund a boutique. She refused. "Not yet," she said. "I want to earn it, thread by thread." He nodded. "Then I'll be your biggest order." She laughed. "Custom tuxedos only." He leaned in. "And something emerald green for our future daughter." Layla's eyes widened. "Julian, too soon. Way too soon." But secretly, the idea settled in her chest like a warm ember. One Sunday morning, they visited the bookstore where it all began. Layla wore her oldest denim jacket. Julian, her newest hand-sewn scarf. The kids remembered him, so did the manager. They stayed for story hour. As a child read aloud from The Velveteen Rabbit, Julian squeezed Layla's hand. "I finally get it," he whispered. "What? Love makes you real." Winter settled over New York like a silver veil. Cold mornings, breath in the air, city lights softened under layers of frost. Layla had always loved this season. It reminded her of cozy nights, old blankets, and warm chai shared on fire escapes. But this winter brought something unexpected. An offer, a real one. It came in the form of an email with a subject line that read, "Paris Residency Fashion Incubator Selection." She clicked it. Read it once. Then again, she had applied 6 months ago, almost as a dare to herself. The application was simple. Submit 3 original designs and a letter about what fashion meant to you. Now they wanted her. 12 weeks in Paris. A fully sponsored residency with mentorship from global designers. Her own workspace. A possible feature in Vogue's New Voices A series. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of, and it meant leaving. She waited 2 days before telling Julian. They were curled up on the couch watching old movies. He had just brought her a bowl of popcorn, extra butter. How she liked it. She paused the movie. "There's something I need to tell you." His smile faded into stillness. Layla handed him her phone. Opened the email. He read it. Slow, quiet. When he finished, he set the phone down. "Paris, yeah. For 3 months." She nodded. He exhaled. "It's incredible." "It is." Silence stretched between them, thick with the words neither wanted to say. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then finally, "You should go." "You think so?" "I know so." Layla bit her lip, "Even if it means." Pausing this, he looked at her with a gentleness that made her ache. "Love isn't a cage, Layla. It's a door we hold open. If you don't walk through this one, you'll regret it. And I'll never be the reason you gave up your wings." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't want to lose you." "You won't." "How can you be sure?" He reached for her hand. Because the woman who stood on that gala stage, who faced cameras in a ripped dress and still spoke truth, she's not going to Paris to leave me. She's going to Paris to become herself, and I'd never want to stand in the way of that. They spent the next few weeks preparing. She didn't want a dramatic farewell, no party, no tears at the airport, but Julian had one surprise left. On her last night in New York, he brought her to the Crestmore Ballroom, the very one where her dress had once betrayed her. Except this time it was empty. Candlelight flickered from tables, soft music echoed from hidden speakers. He'd rented the entire room just for them. Layla stood in the middle of the dance floor, stunned. "What is this?" He stepped toward her, holding a small gift box. "I wanted to rewrite the memory," he said. "Not replace it, just add a better chapter." Inside the box was a silver thread bracelet, thin, elegant, looped with one emerald bead at its center. "One thread," he said, wrapping it around her wrist. "That's all it takes to hold onto something important." She kissed him, slow and trembling, and they danced. No crowd, no cameras, just memory and motion and the quiet promise of return. The morning she left, Julian didn't go with her to the airport. She had asked him not to. "I need to walk through this door on my own," she told him. So he stood on the fire escape of their building, coffee in hand, watching the cab drive away, her silhouette in the backseat fading into dawnlight. He stayed there long after the car disappeared, because some goodbyes are not losses. They're gifts in waiting. In Paris, Layla bloomed. The atelier was old, tucked into the corner of a cobbled street. Her studio overlooked rooftops and cathedral spires. She worked 12-hour days, sketching, sewing, struggling, and loving every second. She made friends, got lost, cried at her first critique, laughed through wine, stained evenings, fell in love with Quasas and herself. She didn't call Julian every day. They agreed not to, but when they did talk, it mattered. He sent her photos of her favorite bakery. She mailed him fabric swatches and pressed flowers from French gardens. Once he texted, "Still wearing your scarf, still drinking lemon tea, still yours." She wrote back, "Still stitching, still stubborn, still yours." Toward the end of the program, her mentor asked, "What inspired your final collection?" Layla didn't hesitate. "A ripped dress, a borrowed jacket, and the man who saw strength in my shame." The audience applauded at her final runway. Julian wasn't there, but she knew he was always watching. When the plane touched down at JFK, Layla looked out the window and smiled. New York was still the same. Buzzing taxis, flashing billboards, steam rising from sewer grates like ghosts stretching after a nap. But she was different. Her suitcase was full of custom pieces and sketches. Her passport held stamps. Her heart, once terrified of being too much or not enough, now beat with quiet certainty. She didn't text Julian. She wanted her return to be hers. So she hailed a cab, passed the same skylane she once thought belonged to other people, and arrived at the Brooklyn walk-up where it had all begun. She climbed the stairs, slower now, half from the weight of the suitcase, half from memory. When she reached the top, she found a note taped to the door, in Julian's handwriting: "If I'm not here, check your studio. If I'm not there, check your bookstore. If I'm not there, check your heart, because I'm always in one of those." Tears welled in her eyes before she could laugh. She turned the key. Inside, everything was exactly where she'd left it. The fabric bins, the yellow teacup, even the crooked needlepoint that read one stitch at a time. She dropped her bag, stood in the center of the room, and exhaled. Home the next morning, Layla made tea. She wrapped herself in her robe and walked to the window. Across the street, in the bookstore's front window, stood a display she didn't recognize, new, bright. Her dresses, 3 of them on mannequins beside a hand-painted sign, "Local designer from bookstore to Paris, limited pieces by Layla James, available now." Her heart skipped. She ran downstairs and across the street, slippers on pavement, coat forgotten. Inside, Rene, her former manager, grinned like a magician mid-reveal. "He came in the week after you left. Rene said, told me to save this window." Julian, Rene nodded, said she started here. She deserves to be celebrated here. "We did it all last night." Layla turned to the display again. It was beautiful, humble, powerful, and it wasn't about Paris. It was about her roots. That afternoon, she returned to the penthouse. The door opened before she could knock. Julian stood there in sweatpants, barefoot, a mug in one hand. He froze, then smiled. "You're early." She dropped her bag and threw her arms around him. The mug hit the floor, splashing tea. But neither cared. "I missed you." She whispered into his shoulder, "I missed us." He pulled back, eyes searching hers. "So, are you back?" Layla touched his face. "I'm not just back. I'm ready." "For what?" "For everything." They spent that weekend doing absolutely nothing. No fancy dinners, no interviews, just long walks. Coffee on the fire escape, a blanket on the couch. They unpacked not just her bags, but her stories, what she'd learned, who she'd become, what she now believed love meant. Julian listened, not as a man waiting to speak, but as someone making space. Layla told him, "I finally realized that I don't have to shrink to fit anyone's world." He nodded. "You never did. And now," she said, "I want to build one. With you, one where both of us grow." He took her hand. "I bought a building," he said. She blinked. "What?" "A brownstone in Brooklyn, 2 floors, one for your boutique, one for a literacy center. The kids can learn upstairs while their mothers work downstairs." Her breath caught. "I want to fund it, but I want you to lead it." Layla stared at him. "You're not just giving me space. I'm giving you the keys." That summer, the brownstone opened. The boutique was named Stitch and Story. Layla stood at the door in a dress she made herself, ribbon in hand, Julian beside her. The crowd gathered. Former clients, local artists, the children from the bookstore. She cut the ribbon. Applause erupted. And she knew, without doubt, that this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, not of a love story about rescue or riches, but of one where a girl with thread and courage stitched her own fairy tale, one real hemline at a time. Layla once believed shame was something you wore, a torn dress, a second-hand life, a quiet dream hidden beneath layers of not good enough. But standing now in the golden light of her boutique, surrounded by laughter, fabric, and the sound of scissors snipping through possibility, she knew the truth. Shame had never been hers to carry. It had been handed down by a world too loud, too rich, too quick to judge anyone who stitched their identity instead of buying it. And love, true love, was never found in saving or rescuing. It was found in standing beside someone, not in front of them. In holding space, not control, in letting go, not gripping tighter. Julian never tried to make her belong to his world. He simply helped her build one that fit them both. Their love wasn't built on fairy tale fantasies. It was built in small, quiet moments, like a jacket placed gently over a ripped gown, like tea with lemon and words left unsaid, like waiting outside a bookstore window, holding faith like a thread. The world didn't stop judging. But Layla stopped listening. She designed clothes not to impress, but to empower. She told stories not to be seen, but to be heard. And when people asked her, "How did you go from a torn dress to Vogue?" she smiled and answered, "By never letting one moment define all the others." Years later, at a university event where she gave a keynote speech on women in design, a student asked, "Do you believe in love at first sight?" Layla paused, then said, "No. I believe in love at the worst sight, when everything is breaking and someone chooses to stay, not because you're perfect, but because you're worth it." The audience applauded. But it was the man in the back row, gray in his hair, pride in his smile, wearing a scarf she stitched years ago, who clapped first. They never married in a cathedral or danced under chandeliers. They exchanged vows barefoot in her grandmother's garden, surrounded by books and string lights and the smell of jasmine. She wore a gown made from pieces of her first design and her most recent, not perfect. Personal, when she whispered "I do," she wasn't promising to never fall apart. She was promising to always sew herself back together, with him by her side, and so, the woman who once stood in shame now stood in strength. Not because the world finally accepted her, but because she accepted herself. And love, it didn't just mend the rip, it made something far more beautiful from it, something sewn, something lasting, something real.